Now, Canelo versus Crawford is more than just a dream fight. It's a chess match of errors and styles. Because Canelo's career trajectory showcases mastery of weight jumps, boxing intelligence, size advantages, and unmatched punch creativity. While Crawford's path, defined by adaptability, slick jab battles, and versatile punch selection while offering unique counters. Crawford will be adding 14 pounds of weight, but will it help or hinder his performance? The clash may hinge on bodywork, tempo control, inside medium and long range fighting. With both men seeking their ways to win, this breakdown uncovers the subtle strategies that could decide boxing's ultimate showdown. So I think it's important to look at both of the career trajectories. So the trajectory of Crawford and the trajectory of Canelo. And in doing this, let's start with Crawford, but let's ask a question. And that question is, how important is a boxer's resume? And I would argue that a boxer's resume is very important because it defines, in a certain sense, their value. So if you look at Muhammad Ali, if you look at Evander Holyfield, if you look at Usyk, if you look at Manny Pacquiao, they all have good resumes. And when I say good resumes, they all have good competition. If we quickly reference Ali, we know that Muhammad Ali had that amazing trilogy with Joe Frazier. He had that fight with George Foreman, who was very feared at the time because of his spectacular victories over Frazier and Norton. And also we had those two fights with Sonny Liston, and they may not have been great fights, but Sonny Liston's domination made that fight was a great name to have on the resume. If you look at Evander Holyfield, you look at, the undisputed cruiserweight champion, maybe the best cruiserweight champion that ever lived. The only person who can contest that would be Usyk, but you see the resume. He fought Riddick Bowe. He fought Buster Douglas, who beat Mike Tyson. He fought Mike Tyson. He fought Ray Mercer. He had so many dancing partners. And then you look at someone in the modern day context like Usyk, and you have the fights with Joshua, former two-time heavyweight champion. Then you have the fights with Tyson Fury, former two-time heavyweight champion, and the fights with Dubois. The point here is that these fighters, they all have great resumes. So how good is Crawford's resume? I would argue that it's very good. That's my argument. And if you look at maybe the most important fight on his resume is the Errol Spence fight. Now, in hindsight, everyone's saying that Errol Spence was damaged or finished. But when the fight was occurring, it was considered a 50-50 fight. And in that fight, Crawford showed a great jab. His jab was lightning. He had that perfect uppercut in round 2. And his combination punching was elite. I remember he did that, a 1-1-2, 3 to the body, and then 3 to the head. He was just absolutely spectacular. And in that fight, he showed complete domination of what was considered at the time an elite fighter. So that's an important part of his resume, an important dance partner. Then you had the Gamboa fight, and Gamboa at the time was unbeaten, and he was seen as a force to be reckoned with. And Crawford went in there, he dominated, and he stopped him in round 9. Another great name, particularly at the time. It's always important to look at the context at the time. Then you had the Victor Postal fight. And again, this was an undefeated fighter with a long reach and a very good jab. And again, he was victorious, unifying not just the WBO title, but also the WBC titles. So this again was another good name on the resume. And then you had Kell Brook. And again, now people talk about Kell Brook being broken and damaged. But Kell Brook was a former world champion. He had a very respectable victory over Sean Porter. And he had a lot of credibility. He was considered to be a very good fighter in Britain. He had a great jab, a great straight right. Apologies. He had a great jab, a great straight right, and he had really good accuracy. I would say he had elite level accuracy. And Sean Porter went in there and stopped Kell Brook in 4 rounds. And I would say again, this was another testament to how good Crawford was. And then you had the Jeff Horn fight. And then this is another example. I believe he came up in weight against the bigger Jeff Horn and dominated the fight. So when you look at the career of Bud Crawford, you can see that there's been strong opposition. And in nearly every case, he's come up against a strong opposition and he's dominated. Maybe not dominated in a Mike Tyson type of way, but he's dominated with skill and he's often stopped the opposition. So when we talk about Errol Spencer's resume, we should hold it in very high regard. So when we look at Canelo's CV, there's a few names that really stand out. And again, he's had multifarious dance partners. The big name for me that stands out is Miguel Cotto. So why does Miguel Cotto stand out? Well, first of all, he was a 4-division champion, a 4-division world champion. So that in itself speaks for itself. He also had many noticeable victories, particularly when he stopped Sergio Martinez in 9 rounds. He also had a victory over Shane Mosley. And Shane Mosley in his prime was a really exceptional fighter. For a reference point, check out the Shane Mosley versus Oscar De La Hoya. That was a great fight, the first fight. And Miguel Cotto was known for that left hook to the body, and he had good boxing intelligence. And it was, from what I remember, I think it was a relatively close decision, but I think that name really stands out on the resume of Canelo. And then we have when he unified the super middleweight division against Caleb Plant. And Caleb Plant at the time was an undefeated warrior. He was a fast fighter. He would throw short left hooks. He would double the left hook, triple the left hook. And again, he was a formidable opponent. And Canelo really, it was, I would say the fight was competitive, but then in the last quarter, Canelo really took over with the power, and I believe he scored a stoppage or a knockout. And then we have, and this is another overlooked name on his resume, Sergey Kovalev. Now, before Sergey Kovalev fought Andre Ward, he was so feared. I actually remember when he fought Nathan, who was a champion. And I think it was Nathan Cleverly. Apologies if I got that wrong. And he went into that fight and he was kind of like an unknown quantity. Like there was a lot of hype around him, but not much was known about him at the world level. And he came into that fight and he absolutely obliterated Nathan Cleverly. It was a truly dominant performance. And you know, Sergey Kovalev was a real hard puncher. I remember him knocking out an opponent with a jab to the body. He really had that power, particularly early in his career or through his world championship reign. And again, he did fight Canelo at the tail end of his career or at the mid end of his career, but it was still a great performance to go up in weight and knock Sergey Kovalev out. So that's another notable name on the resume. And of course, then we have Amir Khan. And Amir Khan, very well-known British fighter who had exceptional speed. Amir Khan had elite level of speed. And he claimed the WBC and ring titles by knocking out Amir Khan in the 6th round with a brutal overhand right. And also, it's important to acknowledge that in his defeats, he has fought the most elite fighters. And of course, he had 2 defeats, the one against Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather, undefeated, has an amazing resume. And of course, he had that defeat against Bivol. Again, another undefeated fighter who is currently undefeated. So again, when we look at Crawford, we say he has an amazing resume. And then when we look at Canelo, we say he has an amazing resume. So in a sense, to use figurative language, both of these fighters have elite level CVs. So let's talk about the weight and size. And I think this is a significant variable of the fight. And for me, the first question that I think of when I think of weight and size with regards to Crawford and Canelo is, can fighters increase weight? Can fighters increase weight? Can they go up weight divisions and be effective? And I think the answer to that can be yes and no. But what is the weight challenge of Crawford? What is the weight challenge? Well, in the purely objective sense, he is stepping up 2 weight divisions. So in an objective sense, he's stepping up 2 weight divisions. So he's adding on 14 pounds. That's what he's adding. Now, I would argue that increased weight, it can do many things. From a negative point of view, increased weight can diminish reflexes and it can diminish your speed. But also, increased weight can increase your power naturally, so it can make you punch harder and it can potentially increase your punch durability. And I think there's an important question to ask here, and that's, does a weight increase affect everyone the same, or does it affect everyone differently? And I think, to me, the answer would be that clearly it affects everyone differently. So clearly, some boxers can put on weight and it will tarnish their reflexes, tarnish their speed, and therefore tarnish their performances in the ring. But there are reference points of people putting on weight and being very successful. Let me give you a few reference points. So Evander Holyfield, he dominated the cruiserweight division, and before Usyk came along, he was considered to be the greatest cruiserweight champion by far. And then he put on weight. He did it in a very scientific manner, but he did put on weight, and he became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, with notable victories against Buster Douglas, Riddick Bowe, and of course, Iron Mike Tyson. And then you have Roy Jones. And Roy Jones was genetically maybe one of the greatest fighters of all time. He had just incredible genetics with regards to his reflexes and speed. And you would think that putting on weight would compromise his greatest assets, but yet he did put on weight and he beat Andy Ruiz for a portion of the heavyweight title. And then you have another reference point, another great fighter, and a lot of people love this fighter, and that's Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran, he dominated at lightweight. He absolutely dominated. But then he went up to welterweight and he beat Sugar Ray Leonard, the elite Sugar Ray Leonard. Now, of course, Sugar Ray Leonard won the rematch, but the point is that Roberto Duran dominated at one weight. He upped his weight, and then he didn't just beat a champion, he beat an elite champion. So clearly, theoretically, you can put on weight and it can increase your performance, but you can also put on weight and it can decrease your performance. And this is the interesting value. This is the interesting variable to this fight. Will the increased weight improve Crawford's performance, or will it negatively impact his performance? And this is one of the variables that make this fight very exciting. So another important part of boxing is punch creativity. And it's important to talk about Canelo's punch creativity, and it's important to talk about Crawford's punch creativity. This can make the difference. And the first question for me is punch creativity important? And if so, why? Punch creativity is important. It's part of a fighter's identity. But another reason why it's important is because a fighter that has good punch creativity, that can be the punch that the opponent doesn't see, therefore increasing exponentially the chance of a knockout. So punch creativity has its place. And I'll give my reference, of course, one of my favorite fighters, Evander Holyfield. I remember he used to do the 3-3, which is the left hook to the body and then the left hook to the head. And then he would sometimes alternate it and he would do the left hook to the head, right hook to the body. Sorry, the left hook to the head, the right hook to the head, and then the left hook to the body. And these were interesting combinations because it's like they were deflections to set up something else. So the left hook to the body is to bring the arm down to then set up the left hook to the head. And the left hook and the right hook to the head gives an opportunity for the left hook to the body, because when you're blocking the left hook and right hook to the head, there's then that opportunity to hit the body. So it's almost like those punches are like deflections. It's almost like you're thinking, right, I want to hit this person with the left hook to the body, but I can't go through the front door. So if I can't go through the front door, I throw the left hook to the head, right hook to the head, and then that sets up the left hook to the body. And then, of course, Holyfield would often just double up with the left hook to the head. So that was his punch creativity, and that's a reference. And Canelo, of course, has punch creativity. So let's just give just 3 basic references. So one of the things that Canelo likes to do, I mean, ultimately, I'd say he's a counterpuncher. I'd say that that's a massive part of his identity, and he's an elite level counterpuncher. But one of the things he likes to do is he likes to throw that left hook to the body, but he throws it to the liver, and again, it sets up that left hook to the head. And that punch to the body, from what I'm told, is such a hard shot that you have to bring your hands down, and then that sets up nicely the left hook to the head. And then another more complicated combination that he does is he sets it up through phases. So he'll start with a feint, and then he'll throw the right uppercut to the head. So it's like 2 deflections. The first deflection is the feint. The second deflection is the right uppercut to the head, which then sets up that left hook to the body. So, again, it's that whole thing of body, head, body. And I think when you're working at an elite level, you do have to kind of be creative with the trajectory of your punches. And then you see what he did against in the Bivol fight. And Bivol defended this very well. But again, he would throw the jab to the body, and then he would throw the overhand right to the head. And it was the execution of that punch. He threw it with such quickness and such strength and such power that, a lot of fighters would struggle with that combination. And he also likes the jab to the head, the right hook to the body, and then the left hook to the head. And again, the right hook to the body is kind of like a deflection to set up the left hook to the head. So, Canelo obviously has more punch combinations, and he does have elite level punch creativity. And it'll be interesting to see what will he have specific punch combinations for Crawford, and how will that either negatively or positively impact the fight. And, will he be able to adapt? Because in elite level fights, and this is an elite level fight, the important thing is to be able to adapt. It's able to figure out the puzzle, and it's able to download the data that the fighter is presenting you, and then be able to produce a solution to that data. So it's like, in a very simple way, if a fighter's dominating with the jab and he's feinting and then throwing the jab, you could, you catch the jab and then you counter. Or if a fighter's throwing the left hook and the straight right, you can catch the left hook, catch the straight right, counter, and then unleash your counter punches. It's about understanding your opponent's identity, understanding his punch combinations, and then reacting accordingly. And believe me, this is easier. This is easy to say in theory and very hard to apply in application. But like I said, Crawford and Canelo, they both have, elite punch creativity, which you would expect for fighters of this level. And that's just a sample of some of Canelo's signature punching styles. You know what? When we talk about punch creativity with regards to Terence Crawford, we have to talk about being a southpaw, because not only does Terence Crawford deliver combinations from the orthodox position, he also delivers them from the southpaw position. So not only does Terence Crawford deliver punches from the orthodox position, he also delivers it from the southpaw position, which then formulates the question. And that question is switch hitting a rarity? And when we say switch hitting, we mean fighting from the southpaw and the orthodox position. And I would say that yes, switch hitting is a rarity. It is a rarity. It's a skill. And off the top of my head, the only people that I can think of that switch hit effectively would be Marvin Hagler. What a great fighter he was. True greatness. Tyson Fury, another great fighter. And of course, Nassim Hamed. And I believe Nassim Hamed, he trained under the Ingalls system, and it seems that's one of the only boxing systems that I'm aware of that kind of encourages switch hitting. So the question then becomes, does Crawford bring greater punch creativity because he switches stances? So from a logical viewpoint, if he has like 5 combinations from the orthodox positions, but 5 combinations from the southpaw position, that means he has twice as many combinations as from an opponent who only has 1 stance and has 5 typical combinations. So in one sense, we can say the answer is yes, but it's important to acknowledge that some people switch stances, but they don't switch stances effectively. Let's give an example. Ngannou, when he fought Anthony Joshua, when he switched southpaw at the end of round 1, that was his actual undoing. And I can't remember if he did it against Tyson Fury, but if he did do it against Tyson Fury, I'm going to assume if he did do it against Tyson Fury, I'm going to assume that he did it effectively. But he definitely did not do it effectively against Anthony Joshua. So anyone can switch styles, but the question is, can you box from a southpaw style and an orthodox style in a natural and effective way? And I think Terence Crawford is considered the best at switch hitting. So let's just take the southpaw context. So one of his typical combinations, and again, it's one of these deflections, is that sometimes he just does the jab to the body, but then he'll do the jab to the body and then the straight left to the head. Really good combination. Really simple, but it can really catch you out. And then sometimes it's the jab to the body, the left uppercut to the head, and then the right hook to the head. And that's another good combination. And then he has some more, I would say, slightly more sophisticated combinations. And I think he delivered this one against Spence. So hopefully I get this right. So it's like again from the southpaw stance, jab, jab, straight left, but then a right hook body and then a right hook to the head. So it's jab, jab, straight left, right hook body, and then a right hook to the head. And the thing is, Errol Spence does it effortlessly. And also another shot that he did, and again he didn't he did this against Spence. And when he did this against Spence, I think it caused a knockdown. He did a reverse 1-2. So instead of doing a 1-2, he did a reverse 1-2, which is straight left first and then the jab. And again, he's very very effective with that combination. The one thing I like about Terence Crawford, he knows when to deliver the punch at the right time. It's almost like his punch execution is perfect. And the Spence Crawford fight is a great reference point for throwing the right punches at exactly the right time. Here's a point I want to make. Clearly, both Canelo and Crawford are elite when it comes to being elite boxers, and they're clearly elite when it comes to punch creativity. But when we talk about being elite, we might say being a 90 out of 100 is elite. But you could argue that maybe Crawford, because of his versatility with the switch hitting, that you could take him to a 90, to a 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, or to the upper ends of the 90s because of that fluidity. He has that fluidity of punching, not only from the orthodox position, but also from the southpaw position. So let's talk about the jab battle. And in boxing, most trainers will assert that the jab is the most important punch in boxing. So let's give some references to fighters with great jabs. And I can think of two main references, Lennox Lewis and Larry Holmes. Lennox Lewis and Larry Holmes, and both of them had tremendous jabs. And when their jabs were on, they were very hard to beat. Now, in boxing history, we've had many different jab battles. And there's a saying in boxing that you should never hook with a hooker, but you should jab with a jabber. So, for example, if you try to exchange hooks with Joe Frazier, that will be an extremely bad idea. If you try to exchange left hooks with Mike Tyson, that would be a bad idea. If you try to exchange left hooks with Tommy Morrison, who had a phenomenal left hook, that would be a bad idea. But if you're fighting a fighter with a great jab, you have to at least engage in the jab battle, even if you're going to lose it, because the jab, it can nullify an opponent. It sets up other punches. It's a crucial part of any boxing match. So it's essential that even if you're fighting an opponent with a better jab, that you engage in the jab battle and are competitive in the jab battle. Let me give you an example. When Frank Bruno fought Lennox Lewis, he engaged and was winning the jab battle. And he gave Lennox Lewis all he could handle for about 6 rounds. And then in the 7th round, Lennox Lewis threw that great left hook. And then again, when Ray Mercer fought Lennox Lewis, they had a tremendous jab battle. And typically, when you look at Lennox Lewis and you look at Frank Bruno and you look at Ray Mercer, you would say that Lennox Lewis clearly has the superior jab. But both of those boxers knew that even though they might not be able to beat Lennox Lewis in the jab game or in the jab battle, they had to engage in the jab battle. And here's another example of someone who didn't engage in the jab battle, and I wouldn't say it backfired because that was a conscious decision, but it meant that they could not win the fight on the scorecards. If you look at the Vladimir Klitschko-David Haye fight, you'll see that Vladimir Klitschko, again, another fighter with an elite level jab, and when he fought David Haye decided primarily not to engage in the battle of the jabs, and that meant that it was a lopsided decision. Clearly, David Haye had a different type of game plan, but I would say, generally speaking, it's so important to engage in the jab battle. And here's a reference point to that. Larry Holmes, considered to maybe have the greatest jab in boxing. However, when he fought Ken Norton, there was a battle of the jabs because Ken Norton knew that he had to engage in that battle. Why do I say this? Well, if you look at the statistics of Terence Crawford and Canelo, Terence Crawford throws 25 jabs on average per round and lands about 5 to 6, while Canelo throws 17.6 jabs per round and lands about 4. It's an interesting point here. Terence Crawford throws more jabs, lands less, but Canelo throws less jabs but lands more. However, despite that variable, on paper, Terence Crawford would be dominant in the jab battle. However, even though it's more likely that Terence Crawford will be dominant in the jab battle, whether he's orthodox or whether it's southpaw, it is essential. It is absolutely essential that Canelo engages in the jab battle, because if he doesn't, Crawford will be stealing the rounds with ring generalship. So there's various ways Canelo can go about this. He could take the David Haye approach and try and go for the knockout, or he could take the Larry Holmes, Ken Norton approach and understand that his opponent may have a superior jab or may not have a superior jab, but regardless of that case, he needs to engage in that jab battle. And the jab battle may be the key to victory, particularly if the fight goes a distance. So now let's talk about inside fighting. And when I think of inside fighting, when you've got the head on the chest and you're throwing punches on the inside, I've got there's many different elite level inside fighters. First one comes to mind, James Toney, absolute elite inside fighter. Second one comes to mind is Joe Frazier, another elite inside fighter. Of course, Evander Holyfield was an elite inside fighter. Now, if you look at the Evander Holyfield fight versus Riddick Bowe, the Evander Holyfield fight versus Riddick Bowe, particularly the third fight, that was a case of fighting on the inside for sustained long periods of time, where Evander would have his head on Riddick Bowe's chest and would be just ripping short punches, and obviously Riddick Bowe would be throwing those left and right uppercuts, punches to the body, etc. So, the one thing is, one of the questions that someone could ask is inside fighting important? And of course, inside fighting is a major, or can be a major part of boxing, and it can be an integral part of boxing. And then we ask the question, is Canelo an elite inside fighter, and is Crawford an elite inside fighter? Because you can be an elite boxer, but you might not be elite at inside fighting. Now, when we look at Canelo and his resume with regards to inside fighting, I think there's two reference points here, and that's the Cotto fight and that's the Golovkin rematch. So that's the Cotto fight and that's the Golovkin rematch. And I believe in those two fights, he showed elite level inside fighting. And when he's on the inside, and let's make it clear, when people fight Canelo, if you look at the Bivol fight, they try to stay away from him. They try to stay away from engaging, or they say engaging in the pocket. So Bivol wanted it to be in range. So a lot of fighters are moving away from engaging purely in an inside fight. But in those two fights, there were moments where Canelo was able to implement an inside fight game, and he was so powerful in that dimension, for want of a better word. So I would say that when you look at Canelo, Canelo is an elite inside fighter, where Crawford is an elite fighter, but he's more of an elite mid-range fighter. So Canelo is an elite fighter, but he's an elite mid-range fighter. So when we ask the question, who is the better inside fighter, we would have to, based on the evidence presented in their fights, give that to Canelo. But at the same time, fights are at many ranges. There's inside range, mid-range, long range. But in the inside range, Canelo is definitely elite. And I would assume, considering the weight advantage and considering the quantity and quality of Crawford's jab, and considering that Crawford is elite at mid-range, that Canelo's most optimal place of doing the most damage and being the most effective will be at that close range. That should be the place where he can dominate. And if you're in Canelo's corner, that's where you would want the majority of the fight to take place. So now let's talk about body punching. And when I think about body punchers, there's a few names that come to mind. Now, the first name might surprise you, Ricky Hatton. That's the first name that comes to mind, and he had that lethal left hook to the body. Ricky Hatton was a really good fighter. In his prime, he was absolutely ruthless. He just would come forward and really dominate. And then, of course, you have the legend, Julio Cesar Chavez. What an amazing left hook to the body he had, and what an amazing career he had. And then you had Roberto Duran, who was a vicious, absolutely vicious fighter and a vicious body puncher. And then you had Joe Frazier, and Joe Frazier, he got low and he would rip those punches to the body. And then you have Evander Holyfield. Not many people may think, well, why would you put Evander Holyfield in there? But interestingly, I believe George Foreman said that one of the best left hooks to the body that he took was from Evander Holyfield. And this brings an interesting analogy that, according to George Foreman, he would get so much power to the body, but he wasn't able to get the same power to the head. But Evander Holyfield's left hook to the body was considered an absolutely vicious weapon. So when we talk about Canelo and when we talk about Crawford, it's natural to ask the question, who is the better body puncher? And I think when we look at Canelo, we can see a direct reference to effective body punching against a good fighter. And When Canelo fought Callum Smith, in the ninth round, he landed a left hook to the body. He landed a left hook to the body that secured the stoppage. And this, I think, is a good evidence or a good reference point to show that Canelo is an effective body puncher. He's also a consistent body puncher. For example, in his recent fights, he averages, I believe, 30% of his punches to the body. So if you take 100% of Canelo's punches, generally speaking, 30% will be to the body. Now, when we talk about Crawford, of course, Crawford is an elite fighter. And when we take the Benavidez fight, we'll see that he has 38 body punches. So he has, in the Benavidez fight, 38% of his punches were to the body. But this was an outlier. And typically, obviously Crawford does throw punches to the body because his combinations are multifarious and he has a lot of punch creativity. But he's not a consistent body puncher like Canelo, and it would appear that his body punching isn't as ferocious as Canelo. And even though he has that 38% body punching in the Benavidez fight, this appears to be an outlier. So if you were to look at it objectively, you would say that it would appear that Canelo appears to be the better body puncher. What would be interesting in this is, number one, how is Canelo going to try and land that left hook to the body? And more interestingly than that is, how is Crawford going to offset, number one, that 30% body punching, but number two, how is he going to negate that left hook to the body? And how will his weight gain, how will the 14 pounds of extra weight affect the punches to the body? Will it mean that he'll be able to take the punches to the body, or will it mean that the punches to the body will be even more devastating? And I think that's a really interesting analogy there. And also, sometimes fighters can shock you. For example, when Lennox Lewis fought Tommy Morrison, Tommy Morrison was known for having a devastating left hook. And the old expression is, don't hook with a hooker. But Lennox Lewis did throw the left hook. Yes, he threw it short and he would throw like a left hook and a straight right, but he did engage in the left hook. He wasn't afraid to throw the left hook. So my point is, will we get that outlier performance that we got against Benavidez when Terence Crawford, threw 38% of his punches to the body? Will he adopt more body punches, or will he just use body punches as part of his punch creativity? I think this is a really interesting part of the fight, because if you look at the concept of Canelo winning the fight, and if you look at the concept of Canelo winning by a knockout, I think that Canelo needs to be on the inside, and he needs to be landing that left hook to the body effectively. If Crawford is able to nullify that body work, then that will be a major advantage to him. However, when we look at the information historically, it would appear that Canelo has a slight edge, or a considerable edge, in the body punching department. So I feel like in this fight, as in many fights, there's different variables. So for example, we've been talking about Canelo having advantages, but remember, Crawford has some advantages as well. He's the better mid-range fighter, probably the better long-distance fighter, probably has a better jab. But Canelo may be the better inside fighter and has devastating and better body punching. That's what the history suggests. That's what the record suggests. But who controls the tempo better? Who controls the tempo of a fight better? And I think controlling the tempo of a fight is such an important element. When Lennox Lewis fought David Tua, he controlled that fight with the jab. He controlled the tempo of the fight because he nullified David Tua completely. So it's important to, as a boxer, it's a skill to be able to fight the fight that you want to fight, to be able to throw as many punches as you want to throw, and force the opponent to fight your fight. And I think with Canelo, maybe a slight weakness is that there's been times in his in both of his losses where he hasn't controlled the tempo. The Floyd Mayweather fight, and it's difficult to make reference to the Floyd Mayweather fight because Canelo was at a very early stage of his career. So the Canelo that fought Floyd Mayweather is no longer the Canelo that's going to fight Crawford. So we need to make a distinction that we need to make a distinction that the Canelo of today is a product of evolution, and therefore he's a different fighter. However, in that fight, Mayweather controlled the tempo. From my recollection, he controlled the tempo by hitting Canelo with very good counter punches. Canelo's a good counter puncher, but in that fight, Floyd Mayweather was a better counter puncher, and this enabled him to control the tempo. And for whatever reason, Canelo was unable to change the tempo. Now, if we look at his last loss to Bivol, this is probably a more recent, well, it is a more recent affair, and this is probably going to be more of a reflection of the type of Canelo that we could get against Terence Crawford. And in that fight, Bivol controlled the tempo. He controlled it. He controlled it with the jab. He made it a long distance fight. Now, Canelo did try to control the fight, obviously, most notably in round 3. He made a very distinctive effort to control the narrative of the fight, but Bivol ultimately got control and he made it his type of fight. And again, in that fight, Canelo was unable to force Bivol to fight his type of fight. Now, in fairness, these are two extraordinarily elite fighters. So in most cases, Canelo controls the tempo of fights. But even if you look at his win against Sergey Kovalev, if my memory serves me correct, before the knockout, I think Sergey Kovalev was controlling the tempo in the sense of he was outworking Canelo, but Canelo had invested enough to the body to slow Sergey Kovalev down to score the knockout. But the point is that one of the ways to beat Canelo is to outwork him, is to outpoint him. And this is the whole thing of controlling the tempo of a fight is so essential. It's so, so important. And there's 2 reference points where Canelo has failed. However, these reference points were against elite fighters. Now, with Crawford, he's never been defeated, so he's always controlled the tempo. Now, against Sean Porter, you could argue there were moments where Sean Porter seemed to be controlling the tempo, but when Sean Porter made it competitive and it got into the later rounds, when he did that, Crawford entered the matrix. And when he entered the matrix, he ended the fight. So Crawford has this ability similar to Usyk, where it's like he's in gear 3. And if you can outfight him on gear 3, then he goes to gear 4, gear 5 real quick. He makes that transition real quick, similar to Usyk. And for the Usyk reference, check out the Anthony Joshua rematch. Anthony Joshua upped the level, and then Usyk went to another level. And it seems that Crawford is the same. And again, another reference point is Errol Spence. He just dominated that from round 1. And also the Amir Khan fight, he dominated that. But even in the Kell Brook fight, the first 3 rounds were very competitive. They were competitive. And let's say, again, Crawford was in gear 3. But then in round 4, he just upped the levels. And it appears to me that in terms of, if you look at who's better at controlling the tempo or controlling the narrative of a fight, you would have to give that to Crawford. Now, again, Canelo's an elite fighter, and in most fights, he controls the narrative, but Crawford's never been beaten, and he's shown that he can control the narrative on an elite level. So I guess the question is, how does Crawford win the fight? How does Canelo win the fight? And from my perspective, I feel that Crawford wins the fight if he does the following. I think it's essential that he wins the battle of the jabs, and he's more than capable of doing it. His jab against Errol Spence was phenomenal. Go watch that fight. His jab was fast, it was quick, and it was accurate. Also, and this is another essential thing, is he needs to be able to take away the left hook to the body. He needs to be able to take away the left hook to the body because that is such a dominant and amazing weapon for Canelo. So if he can win the battle of the jabs and take away the left hook to the body, then that gives him a massive advantage. Also, he needs to get respect with what could be his new punching power. So as he's hitting Canelo, he needs to be hitting him with enough authority to get his respect so that he thinks twice about just stepping in there. Because if Canelo doesn't respect his power, then we're going to have or Crawford's going to have some serious problems with controlling the tempo. And he also needs to confuse Canelo with the orthodox and southpaw punching angles. So if he starts to, switch southpaw, then switch orthodox, and then, Canelo's unable to land his punches and he's confused by the switch hitting because Crawford is probably one of the best switch hitters of all time. If he can utilize this in a way to hit and not get hit and nullify the body attack and nullify the range, then this gives Crawford a great, great opportunity. And under that premise, you could see him possibly winning a decision. But how does Canelo win? Well, part of the way he wins is that he nullifies the Crawford jab. So he engages in the battle of the jabs, and he might not win the jab, but he nullifies the jab enough. And essentially, he lands that left hook. So when he feints with the jab, throws the right uppercut to the head and throws the left hook to the body, if that starts to land, then not only does it score punches, it slows Crawford down and it increases the likelihood of scoring a knockout. So that left hook to the body is a massive investment if he can land it. Also, if he is able to easily absorb Crawford's punches despite the 14-pound weight gain, this will enable Canelo to just get on the inside. Because if he feels, if Crawford is able to hit him hard, that will make him think twice about, okay, I need to think about coming in. But if he can just absorb the punches and just be able to hunt Crawford down, then this increases the likelihood of him landing with not only that overhand right, but that left hook to the body. So if he's able to absorb Crawford's punches, and if by absorbing the punches it causes no procrastination in his attack, then this only increases the chance of victory. Also, Canelo, I feel, needs to find that overhand right because it's such a brutal, brutal punch. Check the fight with Amir Khan for a sensational reference of how brutal that right hand is. And also, when we look at a fight, we look at the different contexts of a fight: long range, mid range, on the inside. So when we look at those three different contexts: long range, mid range, and on the inside, and I feel that Canelo needs to ensure that this fight is fought in the pocket, which means it's fought on the inside. And I think if Canelo does those things, then not only could he win the fight, he could win it by a knockout. So there's various scenarios where Crawford could win, and there's a scenario where Canelo can win. And the variables of this fight is what makes this a really great potential matchup. And hopefully, in this fight, the one thing, whoever wins, hopefully we get a truly great fight. So whoever wins the fight, that's one thing. But hopefully it's a great fight, and it's a fight that we can remember, because this fight has the potential to be something really special.